What we need to do research in Western Canada is the participation and cooperation of many of the folks sitting in this room. So if we do happen to have some of the folks that are participating in the studies that I'm going to, or have participated in the studies I'm going to talk about this morning, thank you. You guys are doing a great service for the rest of the industry. It is, your time and effort and contribution is deeply appreciated. Just to give you a little bit of perspective on where I'm coming from, most of the research that I do, as was said, is certainly looking at factors affecting productivity and health in cow-calf herds. My husband and I actually have a small cow-calf herd on the west side of Saskatoon. He wishes it was a little bit larger, but we both have full-time jobs, so we sort of try to do the best we can with the time that we've got. But it is really important that, again, just to emphasize that what the recommendations that we're making are grounded and realistic and will work for you folks. So you guys sharing your data with us is really, really helping us to do that. Okay, so in terms of trace minerals, I'm sure you guys have seen sort of those really scary diagrams that people throw up where everything is related to everything else and everything interacts with everything else. What we're going to do this morning is kind of get away from that a little bit. We're going to focus on the ones that I think are probably most important, that we can measure the best, that we can potentially do something about, and the ones that we have some evidence are actually an issue in Western Canada. So I'm going to focus a lot on selenium and copper this morning. You can't talk about copper without talking about molybdenum, because that's a very important factor sort of tying up copper. Some of the things we're going to talk about are going to touch on zinc, manganese, iodine, cobalt, iron, and you can't have this conversation without talking about especially the fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin A and vitamin E. They are absolutely critical, and they are very badly understudied in Western Canada. So I do have some information on those, but that's something that we still need to do a lot more work on. All right, so just a quick refresher for those of you who maybe haven't paid attention to this for a little bit, or really don't have a big problem in your herds. When we talk about selenium deficiency, the thing that comes to most people's mind right away is white muscle disease. Those calves that just don't move around very well. They're sore, that they have trouble, that they can't get up, they can't mobilize very well. Sometimes we lose calves that way, so we can end up with the birth of dead or weak calves as well. There's a whole bunch of other things that have been attributed to selenium deficiency. Frankly, we haven't seen a lot of evidence of these except in some herd investigations in Western Canada, but these are certainly potential issues around as well. Things like retained placenta, lower fertility, decreased productivity in general. Okay, copper. The biggest thing I think we need to worry about with respect to copper deficiency in Western Canada is reproductive performance. How many of our cows are actually pregnant in the fall? That's the one place where we do have some evidence, and I'm gonna just talk to you a little bit about that this morning. In terms of looking for copper deficiency in the herd, people talk about bleaching, lighter hair coat. I've had some interesting stories over time, or interesting experiences over time with sort of experts coming onto people's farms and sort of not recognizing kind of normal shedding and all that kind of other things that happens, and start worrying about copper deficiency. We'll talk about how we actually sort that out this morning. Unthriftiness, stunted growth have certainly been attributed. Impaired immune system have been attributed to copper deficiency, and lameness. The other ones on my list here were zinc. The thing that's most frustrating about zinc is it's very, very hard to diagnose. We can take blood samples and test them for zinc. We can take liver samples and test them for zinc. But in terms of actually interpreting those results, because the levels are so impacted by stress levels in the animal, it's very, very hard to get meaningful information there. Manganese, some associations with contracted tendons, potentially reproductive performance. That's not been particularly well studied, and we don't have a lot of good evidence for that, although again, there's some herd investigations where maybe it's been tied to contracted tendons. Not really so sure there. Iodine and cobalt, most of us have that under control. We feed cobalt iodized salt to our cows. We're in pretty good shape there. And they're playing outside in the dirt. Iron is not going to be a big problem for most of our herds. What we want to focus on this morning is not just the obvious clinical signs. We want to focus on the productivity issues that are under the surface. When we see animals with clinical signs, if we have a diagnosis, okay, we know that's an issue, but what is it costing you in terms of lost gain, lost pregnant cows in the fall? That's what we want to pay attention to. So, I was tasked this morning when I got my title last week with trying to look at whether or not how would you figure out if you've got a problem in your herd. Well, the starting point for that is what's the situation in general in Western Canada. So we're gonna start with the situation in general. Several years ago now, we did a study where we had access to liver samples from dead calves, and we had the capacity to actually bleed 1,000 calves within the first week of life. Yes, people did actually let us bleed 1,000 calves within the first week of life. I thought that was pretty nice of them. And from that, we did a whole bunch of stuff with that information. But some of what we got out of that was an idea of what's going on in baby calves for trace mineral status. And we know we've got copper and selenium deficiency in baby calves in Western Canada. We know we've got vitamin A and E deficiency. Your question as a producer should be, okay, that's nice. What does that mean? Well, in terms of being able to take the baby calf information and actually tie it back to disease and tie it back to productivity issues, we also correlated with what we saw in the postmortems on these calves, and we actually had postmortems from 1,600 calves in 200 herds. Now, I realize most of you don't spend too much of your day looking down a microscope, and that's actually a good thing because I get motion sick when I do that, so there's a reason I'm not a pathologist. It's not a fun thing to do for most of us. But these are pictures of muscle from a calf under a microscope. And you'll see in the top ones here, you got nice straight muscle fibers. Those are nice happy muscle fibers. That's what your calf's supposed to look like. What happens when we had selenium and probably vitamin E deficiency as well in these calves, we had the muscle fibers all broken up. So it's little wonder these guys have trouble getting up and getting around. The truly scary part is this up here is a picture of tongue affected by the same thing and the diaphragm affected by the same problem. So not only can these little guys, when they have a serious problem, not get up, but they can't suck and they can't breathe. So that's bad, right? So we do have evidence that if we don't pay attention and we're not on top of this, that we're going to have trouble there. How do we get around that? Well, making sure that the selenium status of our cows is good all the way along. We were able to tie these types of lesions to the selenium status of the cows at pregnancy testing the previous fall. So the cows that went into the fall feeding period already sort of selenium deficient were much more likely to punch out these calves in the spring. So that's something that we need to pay attention to. It's not just a last minute fix, I guess is the point that I wanted to make. The other thing is these things happened a lot less often in herds that consulted with a feed company nutritionist or had worked with somebody in terms of balancing the rations in their herds. So that was a good news story. So good ways to kind of get around that. Okay, let's go back to copper, because this is the one I'm going to sort of really pound on, especially for the producers from Saskatchewan. Another study, 2008, community pastures down in the southern part of the province. Great cooperation from these folks. We're able to sample almost 800 cows here. And copper was, without doubt, the most common deficiency that we saw. When we went ahead and actually looked at how this related to performance in these herds, the one thing that we found was the relationship with pregnancy rates. And where we saw the cut for pregnancy rates was actually a little bit lower than what's actually commonly referred to as deficiency, but it was there and it was very real. And the cows that it was actually for were the young cows in the herd, right? It wasn't all of the cows in the herd. It was the young ones. So your youngest, your second and first, second, third calvers, your youngest cows are the ones that are going to sort of be at the greatest risk here. Why don't we see a problem in the older cows? Are they magically immune? No, they're not magically immune. They were open and they got culled 5 years ago. They're gone. They're already out of your herd. The ones that were susceptible to copper deficiency have taken the bus to McDonald's already, right? So there is a real and very real effect. These are pregnancy rates on the side here, or open rates, I should say, on the side here, and you can see there's a very dramatic slope up there. So in these young cows, copper is really, really, really important. Okay, so what do we know about right now? The studies I've been talking to you about are a few years old. In 2014, we were able to get blood samples in a study that's being coordinated by Dr. John Campbell from almost 100 herds across, well, 103 herds actually across Western Canada, most of them in Saskatchewan and Alberta, a few in Manitoba, and 2,000 blood samples from those. Selenium deficiency, we seem to be doing a little bit better here than we were a few years ago. When I look back at my older data, it looks like we're maybe doing a bit better job here. We've got, less than 1% of the cows that are actually considered deficient. We've got 21% of the cows that are less than adequate. So we still got room to improve here. We can still do better here. So that's good news. We seem to be doing a bit better there. Where we're not doing very well is with copper. We still haven't changed there, and in fact, if anything, it might have drifted down a little bit from some of the older data that I've got. Got 43% of the cows that are actually below the deficiency level. If we go up to the less than adequate level, it's a lot closer to 70 or 80% of the cows. Almost 90% of the herds had one deficient animal at least in there, and 13% of those cows were below that 0.4 cutoff that I mentioned, where we actually see impacts on pregnancy rates, where we know we're seeing impacts on pregnancy rates. So we need to do better with copper. And we also need to worry about molybdenum because it ties up the copper. So about 13% of the cows that we sampled had higher than recommended levels of molybdenum in their serum. Okay, so we know we have a problem in Western Canada. Is your herd at risk? One of the ways of sorting that out is taking a bit of a look at how minerals are managed in your herd and what sort of things are going on in your herd. Oops. First thing, sort of management of supplements. Last trimester before calving and right before breeding are certainly the most critical times. I mentioned before year-round is important, but those are the ones. Not forgetting about the vitamins. Sometimes we just put out a mineral mix or mineral block or whatever if we think we got ourselves covered, and we forget about the vitamins. Vitamin A and D, especially in the late part of the winter, are very, very important. Most of us, because of the way we feed, it's hard to force feed minerals, right? It's much, much easier to provide the minerals free choice. Do I have a good solution to this? No, I don't. Well, maybe some of our other speakers this morning will. But you do need to recognize that just because we've put it out does not mean that they all come, and it does not mean that they all come consistently. The studies that have been done have shown huge variability between cows and between herds in how much mineral is consumed. So you need to be aware of that. There'll be some cows that do okay with free choice, and there's some cows that don't ever go, and some cows that eat ridiculous amounts. And you probably observed that if you sort of pay attention to the feeders that you've got out. How can you kind of level that out a little bit? Maybe physical location, just being aware that there's individual animal preferences, looking at the palatability of your mix. Is it mixed with salt? What's your water quality, right? And that can impact intake. And then what types of feeds are you feeding, and how much do you need to worry about this? Just to hammer home that point, if you do have an opportunity to force feed, what are your options? Or I should say, why should you do this? There was a study done out at Goodale. Most of the data that I've got is actually from producer farms. This one was done out at the Goodale Farm, which is the research facility for the University of Saskatchewan, or one of the research facilities for the University of Saskatchewan. And the study that was done there was done primarily by Dr. Stephen Hendrick, and he found that cows that were force-fed mineral were 6 times more likely to have adequate levels and got pregnant 2 times faster. Force-fed came into heat 2 times faster and got pregnant about 5 days earlier than cows that were free choice. in a fairly carefully controlled trial out at Goodale Farm. So there is a benefit to doing it. It's just very, very hard with some of the management that we've got. So if you look for options, if they're there, it's worth it. Okay? The form of the mineral, I'm not going to spend too much time on this morning, but everybody is aware that depending on what form we buy our mineral in, the availability is different. Chelated minerals are certainly touted as being more available. Are they worth the cost? That's something that you need to seriously think about it, and you need to talk to your veterinarian, talk to your nutritionist about whether they're worth the cost in your herd and in your situation. How else are your animals at risk? Are you using boluses? Are you injecting your animals? Well, the data on boluses is a bit mixed in terms of how well they work and in what circumstances. They don't work for they're not an option for baby calves. Injections only last for a certain period of time. I do know folks who inject their cows at pregnancy testing, for example, with vitamin A. The problem with that is it only lasts for a short period of time, and it's not going to keep those cows going till calving. So we need to pay attention to that. Baby calf injections with selenium and vitamin A. We don't want to be using more injections than we have to in our calves, but certainly for the selenium, there's some evidence that the calves that are injected are less likely to die from previous studies that we've done and are less likely to get sick. So especially if you're in a deficient area, it's certainly something you want to pay attention to. So if there's good evidence that this is a good thing to do. Who's doing it? Well, based on another survey that we did in 2011, it looks like about 40% of people are injecting their calves with either selenium E combination or an A and D combination at calving. So there's a fair number of folks that are still doing this. All right, what about testing your feed? Your trace mineral levels and certainly vitamin levels are going to vary from year to year. It's going to depend on all sorts of things, some of which we'll talk about in a minute. But the levels of precipitation, the growing season, there's all sorts of things that are going to come into play there. So just because you're good one year doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be good the next. It's good to test once in a while, recognize the difference between different forages. The Saskatchewan Forage Council did a great study that was published in 2014 that has some very, very good information on this. Your water, are you high in total dissolved sulfates? It's certainly going to decrease the amount of mineral that the cows take in. There's also other minerals in the water that you want to specifically pay attention to. If you haven't tested your water for a while, it's probably worth a look. And sometimes you can get surprised. Sulfate is a really bad one for tying up copper. We know that it has an impact on copper. We've seen that. We had a new dugout that we dug about 7 years ago now, and it turned out that it was ended up being spring fed. Tested the water in there because the cows were kind of acting a little bit funny around it. Turns out it had 5,000 parts per million sulfate. That's very, very, very bad. Dugout got filled in. First it got fenced off and then it got filled in. So you do sort of need to pay attention to that for lots of reasons. Copper certainly is one of them. The other one is the iron concentration in the water. It's above 0.3 parts per million. There's certainly the potential for it to tie up copper as well. All right, what about losses during storage? Vitamins do not last forever. Trace minerals, if they're dry and clean, they're pretty, if they're in a good dry place, they're going to last for a while. Vitamins are not. So you need to be very, very, very aware of sort of how old your supplement is and whether it's getting turned over. Feeder design and maintenance is important. If the mineral is out there, it doesn't stay dry, it doesn't stay clean, it's not going to be palatable, but it's also going to lose quality as well. Is your herd at risk, right? Looking at breed differences, there's some suggestions Simmentals might have higher copper requirements than some of the other breeds, but there might be other breed differences as well. Stress really messes up zinc. So that's animals that are under stress. That's going to be an issue. Copper and zinc during pregnancy are pushed into the calf by the cow. The cow sacrifices her copper and zinc to take care of her calf. So requirements increase then. And then newborns. Babies are born essentially with almost no vitamin E. It doesn't go through the placenta. That's really, really important. It links to white muscle disease just as much as selenium does. So if they don't get colostrum, they don't get vitamin E. And there's a lot of people that are sort of not aware of that. So that's another good reason for making sure that you get colostrum into those calves. And if you're not quite sure, this is not approved, but it's pretty safe. A couple of capsules, vitamin E capsules from Costco or wherever else are certainly an option. It's a nice, safe option for getting a little bit of extra vitamin E into the calves. And we have done some studies that suggest that those levels stay up for 2 or 3 weeks after doing that. All right, getting towards the end here, soil type. This is not as straightforward as we might think it is. The Sask Forage Council study did their study on different soil types, looking at where there was problems, and then I looked at our blood results from 2014 to see sort of how that correlated with different soil types in Saskatchewan. A little bit of not necessarily exactly the same answers from what's in the plants and what we saw in the animals. So I'm not really sure what to make of that just yet. There was no difference in selenium among the different soil types that we saw in the blood samples. That's what I'm focusing on here today. Copper deficiency was more common in the cows on the gray soil types, but it's possible that there's some management factors that might be playing into play there that we just don't have good data on. And molybdenum, high molybdenum levels were more common on the brown, although again, there might be some management factors that we just don't have data on there that are coming into play there. But soil type might be part of the issue. Precipitation is definitely part of the issue. When you have drought, like we did at the beginning of the summer, you're going to have vitamin A and vitamin E deficiency. That's going to be a problem. Cows need green grass. Well, they need grass, but they need, ideally they need green grass if their vitamin A and vitamin E levels are going to be good. There's also the potential for a dilution effect if we're looking at things like selenium and copper. And we do have some evidence from a previous study that it was done during a drought year, but that higher levels of precipitation, that we saw lower levels of selenium after we adjusted for all sorts of other things. So pay attention to precipitation in terms of the need to do testing in your herd. And finally, if you're looking at supplementation, if you're looking at is your herd at risk, you need to recognize the issue of balance being important. It's not just the single minerals, it's how they relate to each other. The copper molybdenum, ideally there should be 5 times as much copper in your feed as there is molybdenum. Depending on the type of feed you're on, you might need more. Some canola hay can be higher in sulfur. So that's something you might want to take into consideration. And zinc and copper need to be in balance as well. So it does kind of complicate the issue and things to be aware of in terms of why you might be seeing deficiency issues when it looks like things should be okay, right? And finally, and this gets back to the sustainability sort of environmental footprint issues that you guys were talking about at sort of the end of the previous session there. Too much is as bad or worse than too little. We need to have the right amount. It's not about just adding more and more and more. We need to make sure we've got the right amount here so that we're going to be able to continue to get supplements and work with our animals. To start with, we get with toxicity is a big issue. Selenium can be toxic if it's overdosed. Copper can be toxic if it's overdosed. If you've got sheep and cattle together, you've got to be very, very careful because sheep are very susceptible to copper toxicity. So those are things that you need to pay attention to. Vitamin A can be toxic if you get too much. So you need to have the right amounts. Very, 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 very important. And then again, from the environmental footprint perspective, in the United States, some of the big heavy dairy areas, selenium is an issue in the environment. In Europe, it's more of a copper and zinc issue. All right, so just to kind of wrap things up here a little bit, you're sitting there going, okay, that was lots of stuff. How do I work my way through this issue in my herd? How do I decide whether I'm at risk and whether or not I have a problem? Well, just walk through your supplementation management. Is there anything that you're doing that would, potentially could be improved, could put your herd at risk, or do things looking okay? What do you know about the need to sort of supplement in your herd? How much the cow's actually consuming. It's like, oh cool, I'm putting out trace minerals, I'm doing a really good job at that. Are they actually eating the amount that it says that they should be eating on the package? Just try a little calculation 1 month or 2 months and see how they're doing, and then try it look in the summer, look in the winter. Make sure you look more than once a year. Feed and water samples. If you're still in doubt, and it's certainly once in a while, every couple of years at least, you should be looking at feed and water samples and make sure that you know what the cows have access to. Blood testing in cows, that's towards the bottom of the list. If it looks like there's a need, if there's any sort of potential risk or problem from the other things that you've been looking at, then, or any production issues in your herd, then that's an option. In the spring, though, you're going to get the best information from doing this in the spring, and finally liver samples from dead or aborted calves or from the meat you put in your freezer. So with that, I will wrap it up. And do we have time for a quick question or no?
Yeah, we have time for one or two quick questions.
Hi.
I think Thomas Mould, is this thing on? I think that was really fantastic delivery. Thank you ever so much. With the copper seen in the brown and black soils, would the ultimate be to actually make sure that we correct the copper on the overall farm, because it can be so restrictive to adequate returns on all sorts of crops?
Yeah, I think with the copper, the one thing I can say is that almost all of the cows and all of the herds that we looked at, and this applies to pretty much all of the studies that we have done, have had a need for better copper supplementation. So I think in Saskatchewan in general, most of us could probably do a little bit better. We have to be careful about the toxicity issues, but regardless of soil zones and everything else, copper in Saskatchewan is one of the things that we know we can strive to do a little bit better on. And again, it's getting that right balance. So regardless of sort of soil or whatever else, the whole farm approach to improving copper intake would be good.
Hi, Rick Hards from the Gomas. A couple questions pertaining to supplementation of vitamin A. How long does the injection last? You said it's short, but how?
I'm trying to, it's been a while since I looked at that data, probably no more than a month or two maximum. I'm reaching a little bit there, so if somebody else has a more exact answer, please pipe up. But it's not a lot longer than that. So going, say, in November and expecting the cows to be okay in April, that's where we run ourselves into trouble. So if you did want to use it, looking at it, say you run your cows to do scours vaccinations or something like that, or you're treating for lice or something like that in the winter, that might be another time. But if you can get it into the feed somehow, if you can give a vitamin A supplement somehow to the cows, that's even better yet.
My next question is mineral deficiencies in relation to your vaccination program. How does that affect the vaccines you give cattle if you're deficient in?
There's certainly a lot of evidence, more from dairy cattle and from beef cattle, of the issue of immune deficiencies with some of these trace minerals and vitamins. So given that, you want that combination. We want our cows to have good balanced nutrition, and that means good body condition scores, good overall minerals, good trace minerals, and then a good vaccination program in place. And we've got more and more evidence all the time about the vaccination programs that are sort of generally recommended actually paying dollars to producers. So.